Hey everyone, this is the first video on this channel. I usually post front-end development videos over on my main channel, but this channel is mostly going to be devlogs of me building games with TypeScript and Phaser. And those games are probably almost always going to be 2D pixel art games. Starting with this very early prototype of a game I am working on, which for now I am referring to as just Swagman. I want to get into showing you the fun stuff quickly, and a little later on we will see if my code can maintain 60 FPS with this over-the-top bonfire I've set up. But first, just a quick bit of context before we get into the fire mechanic. This game will be an open-world sandbox-style survival game focused around bushcraft that aims to capture the feeling and spirit of the old Australian swagman. A swagman was essentially a vagabond that would travel from town to town in the 1800s and early 1900s, walking long distances and camping in the bush along the way. Stereotypically with not much else but their swag, which is essentially some form of bedroll, a tucker bag for their food, and the iconic billy. This game aims to capture the challenging, fun, free, and peaceful aspects of that lifestyle, whilst conveniently being able to ignore the harsh realities of what it would have actually been like. I'll expand more on the philosophy and ideas for the game in future videos, but for now let's move on to the fire. A big part of survival anywhere is of course fire, and I wanted fire to be a central part of this game. I want each mechanic in this game to be fun in its own right, and as such a central feature, I didn't really want to just have the player place a campfire and that's it. I want to have the player have to actually bushcraft the fire and try to capture the challenge and satisfaction of doing that, along with potentially fatal consequences if they are unable to get a fire started, or perhaps even fatal consequences if a fire is not managed properly and is allowed to spread. So I began with the ability to light just a single fuel source on fire. To do that, I created this combustible TypeScript mixin so that I could easily make any object in the game combustible. This would also allow me to configure different types of fuel objects like tinder, sticks, and larger fuel like branches and logs. This combustible mixin utilizes this state machine that I built with xstate. This state machine keeps track of what state of combustion the fuel source is in, which can be any of these states. It also controls how and when to transition between these states, which is primarily driven by the current temperature of the object. For example, once it crosses the threshold for combustion, it will keep consuming itself until all the fuel has been used. To start the combustion, I can send a message to the state machine to apply heat to it. To begin with, I am just using a lighter to trigger this process, which will be a method available in the game, but there will also be incentives to use other methods like a ferro rod, glass, flint and steel, or even a bow drill to start the fire. With the ability to have one object combust, I then needed to add the ability for these objects to transfer heat to other nearby objects and cause them to combust also. I already have a way to apply heat, which is what I'm doing with the lighter, so all I really need to do here is have each object that is on fire send apply heat events to any other combustible objects that are near it. To keep things reasonably performant, what I did was essentially split the map up into a grid. If an object is combusting, it will look for other combustible objects in its own grid space or any of its immediate neighbors. If it finds any, it will send an apply heat event to the state machine for that combustible object. The last important piece here is the interplay of different fuel types. Large fuel types like a log should last for a long time, but they should also be difficult to light. Smaller fuel types should be easier to light but burn up quickly. So at least for an initial version, I wanted to replicate a typical fire making process. It would require you to first light some tinder, which would quickly burn out, but this would light your kindling, which in this case will be small sticks. They will burn long enough to cause small fuel like this branch to combust, and then the branches will burn long enough to cause the logs to combust. To achieve this, I added the ability to define different fuel types and also allow configuring the amount of fuel for each fuel type, which will control how long it lasts. I also added this heat transfer rate. Larger fuels will have a lower heat transfer rate, which means that even as it is being sent apply heat events, it will take a long time for the object to reach its combustion temperature. Tinder, however, will reach its combustion temperature instantly. This is a relatively simple approach, but it worked quite well. As you can see, I am able to successfully get the flow of events I want here. If I try to ignite the larger fuel types, it won't do anything. But if I start with the tinder, use the ignited tinder on the kindling, and then the kindling on the branch, and then the branch on the log, I can successfully get the log to combust, which will then continue burning for a long time. There are already some interesting interactions here too. For example, I can actually skip the tinder and light the kindling directly if I use the lighter multiple times. This is an option I actually want for the game because it provides an easier way to start a fire, but it will also consume the fuel for the lighter more quickly, which will be a limited resource. So let's get to the fun part. I've got 400 combustible items spawned on screen here, far more than likely any realistic game scenario will lead to, but I did want to see if the game could maintain 60 FPS with this scenario. First of all, I am very happy with the way the fire spreading mechanic is working here. It will probably require some fine tuning, but I think it's pretty close already. But we do have the FPS drop to about 30 as it gains momentum, then as most of the smaller fuel starts to burn up, we get back to 60 FPS. So definitely a noticeable lag spike there. I may look to improve that, but given this is a pretty unrealistic scenario anyway, I think these results are pretty good and well within acceptable limits. I'm really happy with how this has turned out so far, and I like how much flexibility it provides. I like that it enables gameplay that I haven't specifically coded into the game. For example, you can already do some silly and interesting stuff like creating a chain of logs to create a sort of time delay fire system. Maybe you use that as a strategy for cooking food or keeping warm over a longer period of time. I really want to just provide a bunch of interesting mechanics and then let people do whatever they want with them, whether that is a realistic swagman roleplay or silly survival techniques and contraptions. So where to from here? My general goal here is to make this playable every step along the way so that I can make sure it's actually fun. So next up, we'll likely be giving some purpose to this fire mechanic by adding the ability to find and gather fuel, start a fire, and use that to keep warm. Then we'll see if that gameplay, as limited as it is actually any fun. If you think any of this sounds interesting, I'd love a subscribe before you go. I find these videos pretty fun to make, but it'd be great to have a few people to actually watch them as well. Also, please drop a comment if there are any particular aspects you want me to focus on in videos. There is a ton of stuff that I've left out of this video. Alright, that's it for now. I hope to see you here again for the next one.